History of literary translation in Russia. Literary translation in Russia before the 19th century. Literary translation in Russia in the first half of the 19th century. Translation in the second half of the 19th century. Translation in Russia is traced back to the period of adoption of Christianity in Kievan Rus 988 AD, known as a period of written documents. Cyril and Methodius, the outstanding scholars, theologians, and linguists who are called the apostles of Slavs for the cultural and religious development of the Slavic people, translated the Holy Scriptures into the language later known as Old Church Slavonic or Old Bulgarian, and invented a Slavic alphabet based on Greek characters. Old Christian translations were not only philosophical ones, there were also doctrines of the new religion. These included lives of saints, homilies, chronicles, and the like. As for Old Russian translations, they were mostly translations from Greek, according to the meaning, and which avoided word-for-word precision. As a matter of fact, they were adapted, borrowed works with no name of the translator mentioned. Secular literature was translated rather freely. Translators could change the source text to their liking, or stimulate someone else's stories by taking either a plot, an idea, or some poetic image from them to create their own works. From the 17th century, translations were no longer anonymous. One of the most eminent figures of the 16th century was Maxim the Greek, who came from Greece to Russia to edit clerical books. Since Maxim the Greek could not write Old Church Slavonic, the written form of the Russian language of the time, he translated from Greek into Latin, and his assistants translated the Latin text into Old Slavonic. The 18th century was the period of Peter the Great reign and of his reforms. Himself an erudite, Peter was the first ruler to sponsor education and to actively promote translation of books from Western European languages. Beginning in the 1760s, technical translation boom gave turn to a fiction translation surge. It was at this time that Russia came to know the foreign language. A rapid growth of fiction translation marked the reign of Catherine II the Great. That period was called the Golden Age of Translation, since it brought major European masterpieces to Russia. The Queen established a society for the translation of foreign books, Собрание переводчиков. The Translators' Council functioned until 1783. It employed over 110 translators. Among them were Tredyakovsky, Sumarokov, and Radищев. More than 173 volumes were translated and published. Sometimes literary works were translated not from the source text. The last decade of the 18th century saw the establishment of the translation department with the Academy of Science, which was the initiative of the Princess Knягиня Dashkova. The theoretical views of Russian translators of those days were influenced by the dominant aesthetics of classicism. One of the most prominent figures of the 18th century literature and translation was Vasily Tredyakovsky, a Russian literary theoretician and poet whose writings contributed to the classical foundations of Russian literature. His translations frequently aroused the ire of the censors, and he fell into disfavor with the Academy's superiors and conservative court circles. Tredyakovsky's classicist attitude toward translation to reflect an ideal rather than the source text was confirmed by his assertion that a translation differs from an author only by name. Thus, he updated translated works, leaving out the historic coloring. He mostly translated classical authors, medieval philosophers, and French literature. Another Russian translator and poet, Alexander Sumarokov, viewed translation in the contrary way. As the 18th century creator, he often followed the classicist track and composed free translation, the example of being the adaptation of Hamlet, 1748. The translation was apt to create a new work close to the ideal. He adapted a foreign text to the Russian reality and culture by substituting a foreign lexical coloring with the Russian one. The second third of the 18th century knew another literary trend which also had an influence on translation: sentimentalism. The dominant figure of Russian sentimentalism was Nikolai Karamzin, a Russian historian and the author of a very popular story, Бедная Лиза, 1792, Poor Lisa. He translated a lord and was also a translation critic. It was he who familiarized the Russian reader with a number of European authors, especially sentimentalists. The main idea of sentimentalism in translation was the possibility of changing the source text according to the comprehension and taste of the translator.